Can't get it.
Wow.
Three women are vying for the position in one of the tightest races in recent memory. Christine Drazen is trying to become the first Republican governor in nearly 40 years.
I'm confident that Oregonians will recognize this opportunity to lead our state in a new direction.
Tina Kotek will try to keep the Democrats in power in Salem.
There's a clear contrast in this race, and really, there are two conservatives in the race, and then there's me.
And the wild card, unaffiliated candidate Betsy Johnson, who left the Democratic Party in her bid for governor.
We are trying to bring Oregonians together.
There's no shortage of critical issues: homelessness, affordability, a struggling criminal justice system, and figuring out how we continue to recover from the pandemic. Tonight we ask, how will the candidates lead Oregon forward?
All right, we should be good.
KGW and the Oregonian present the debate for Oregon's governor.
Good evening and welcome to the final debate in the race for Oregon governor. Thanks for joining us. I'm David Molko, and we've got a lot to cover over the next hour to help you make that important decision of who is the best candidate to lead Oregon forward. Though first, we want to quickly outline our format for you. In the first round here, each of the three candidates will have the chance to respond to the same question. Following that, we're going to move on to specific questions for each candidate. Candidates will each get 60 seconds to answer and 30 seconds if a rebuttal is necessary. And then depending on how things shake out, we may also have a lightning round. Along the way here, you will also hear directly from KGW viewers and Oregonian readers who have sent us their questions. All right, let's introduce our three candidates. On the left, Democrat Tina Kotek, who served as House Speaker for 9 years. In the middle, Betsy Johnson, who is running as an unaffiliated candidate. Ms. Johnson first served in the House before becoming a state senator and left the Democratic Party before running for governor. And on the right, Republican Christine Drazen, who served in the House before becoming
Are we doing okay?
Was the Republican minority leader in the House for 2 years. We also want to introduce our two moderators for you here. Hillary Baroud, she is the state government and politics reporter at the Oregonian, and my co-anchor, Laurel Porter, anchor and host of Straight Talk here on KGW. All right, it is time to get started, but before we get underway, we randomly picked who would get to answer the first question, and that is Ms. Kotek, followed by the other candidates. Candidates, a reminder here, your responses in this section should be no longer than 60 seconds. I'm going to be watching the time, and Laurel, you kick us off with the first topic.
Thank you, David, and welcome, candidates. Great to have you here. There are an estimated 15,000 people across the state of Oregon who are homeless. Thousands of them are here in Portland. Mayor Wheeler is expected to announce a plan soon that would ban all unsanctioned camps across the city and instead ask the county to set up 3 massive sanctioned campuses of 500 people or so. Do you agree with that plan? Is that the way to go? And what would you do as governor to get the next 1,000 people off the streets? And we begin with Tina Kotek.
Homelessness is a crisis in every part of our state, and as we're specifically talking about Portland,
From what I understand of Mayor Wheeler's plan, I think he's headed in the right direction. But I'll be honest, Mayor Wheeler and the city have promised a lot of things. They need to actually make it happen. I think it is important to make it easier for outreach teams and folks who are providing services to connect with people who are camping outside. And I think this will facilitate. But it has to be done right. It has to be done effectively. And honestly, as governor, I'm going to make sure it does happen. Holding the mayor and the city accountable to getting people off the streets, connecting people with services. As the Oregonian has noted in their endorsement of me on Sunday, I'm the only one with a comprehensive plan at this moment to help people leave homelessness, get into shelter, and get into permanent housing. And I will be working with the city, with the county here in the Portland area to make sure we can meet those goals.
And David, I think you wanted to mention something about that endorsement that Tina mentioned from the Oregonian.
Yeah, absolutely. We should note that the newsroom and the editorial board of the Oregonian are independent. Also, KGW,
I love lasagna.
will not endorse a candidate in this race or any other race during this election cycle. Thanks, Laurel.
And Ms. Drazen, how would you answer that question? Do you agree with the mayor's plan, and what would you do to get the next 1,000 people off the streets?
Yeah, I appreciate the mayor of Portland stepping into this very difficult issue and making a plan. It's time for action. And for far too long, the leaders in our state capitol have made the decision to set this issue aside and put other priorities first. As governor, I have committed to declare a homelessness state of emergency on day one. Not to simply look at this like it is a faceless mass of people, but to instead approach this issue like it's the humanitarian crisis that it is. We have got to recognize that the people that are living on the streets have extended needs beyond simply housing, and giving people a key to a tiny house is not going to solve all these problems. We've got to recognize the complexity of this challenge. It's a humanitarian challenge, and ensure that homelessness is rare and temporary, and we do not accept that it will remain permanent and chronic in our state.
How do you get 1,000 people off the streets? What would you do specifically?
The answer to this question is quite simple, actually. You have to know who they are. And right now, when we look at engagement with our homeless populations in Oregon, we know that the response is almost entirely housing first. That the challenges and the problems of the people living on our street, that they're not approaching it like it's a case management challenge. That we're moving people beyond being houseless and unsheltered into supportive housing, into services, and then on to stability and the dignity of work. You have to know who they are. And frankly, if people decline services, if they're choosing a homeless lifestyle because they're facing substance use disorder, or in fact it's a choice that they're making, it's time for our state to recognize there must be accountability.
And Betsy Johnson, do you agree with Mayor Wheeler, and what would you do?
I don't even know what any of that means.
Thank you very much. I applaud the mayor for taking decisive action. Unfortunately, he's waited too long, but I will have his back. The thing that I find ironic about this is that as soon as Mayor Wheeler announced his plan, the first thing that happened was criticism from the county. I think that has been the hallmark of dealing with the homeless problem, that we can't seem to agree on the methodology. Everybody thinks their way is the correct way, housing first or deal with the underlying problems. I think that it is imperative that we have metrics to measure our success so that we're not just taking people and moving them from one smaller encampment. The mayor, I think, spoke to all three of us and said that there are between 500 and 700 of these kind of spontaneous encampments. We've got to have metrics. But I want to point out, I'm glad Tina's on board with this, because it was Tina pushing through a bill that facilitated and enabled sidewalk camping. And I'm glad that she's now siding with the mayor to try to deal with this. We'll need enforcement in these camps that he has set up, nutrition, enforcement, and case management.
Tina Kotek, did you want to respond?
I would like to respond, because the city has the ability
I bet you would.
to enforce time, place, and manner to move tents off of city sidewalks that are unsafe and unhealthy, and they're doing that, and I support that. They need to do more of that. And Senator Johnson knows that that's not what that legislation did, but I do want to speak to Representative Drazen's comments. Nearly 3 years ago, I called for a homelessness state of emergency here in our state, coming into the 2020 session. Governor Brown did nothing, and what's worse, Representative Drazen walked her Republican colleagues off the job, and $120 million in funding that could have gone to shelters, new affordable housing construction, and siting our shelters faster.
Talk about the walk-off.
Didn't happen. We lost momentum. I will lead where Governor Brown couldn't or wouldn't on this issue, and Representative Drazen's
record on this is one of failure.
Well, let me give Representative Drazen, Christine Drazen, a chance, but quickly.
Yeah, of course. No, thank you for this. The assertion that the Speaker of the House, that's had responsibility for this challenge for over a decade, would hand responsibility to the House Republican leader, you know, it's a little bit flattering, but it's really, really, really off base. The reality of the situation is that the Speaker of the House prioritized almost everything before she prioritized homelessness, and the opportunity to address this issue has been on her plate for a very long time. She's failed to lead on this issue, and you can't pass it off to Kate Brown, and you certainly can't pass it off to the Republicans. This is the greatest indictment of Tina Kotek's leadership, is how she failed to act on this issue.
All right, thank you, Ms. Drazen. I want to get to our next question here.
She accidentally said Republicans.
That was just our first question here, but we're going to go to our first viewer
That's hilarious.
question now. This has to do
Betsy
with
Cotter.
substance
Like,
use
what?
treatment and mental health. Let's take a look.
Can't pass it
Hello,
off to the
my name is
Republicans.
Dr. Andy Mendenhall, and I'm the president and CEO of Central City Concern. In Oregon, we have long wait times for accessing treatment for substance use or mental health conditions. As governor, can each of you explain what you will do to improve access to behavioral health care services for those who need it most?
Don't do drugs.
All right, our thanks to Dr. Mendenhall for that question. I will add on top of that, this is for all candidates, what would you do to encourage or incentivize more people to work in the behavioral health field? Ms. Drazen, we'll begin with you.
Yeah, thank you for this. We have deep and substantial workforce challenges in this particular category. I mean, we have them across different fields, certainly nursing, but behavioral health challenges, the workforce issues are real. We need to do everything that we can to encourage a version of this where we accept licenses from other states, where we incentivize, where we improve reimbursement rates. We have got to throw everything we can at our workforce challenges. But when we're talking about increasing access to services and access to supports, you know, when I talk to people that are in this field, they talk all the time about what they really need is not program change, they need systems change. And that the system, in fact, is heavy-handed and broken. And too often you've got the Oregon Health Authority demanding a heavy-handed regulatory response when people on the ground know that it is preventing them from actually providing supports and services to the people who need it the most. We have got to recognize that sometimes the state is the problem, and especially when it comes to these challenges, we can resolve this. We can expand
all the bureaucracy gets in the way.
We can improve access to services.
All right, thank you, Ms. Drazen. Ms. Johnson, it's a two-parter: access and the workforce.
Thank you. We have to recognize that Oregon has the dubious distinction of being 50th in the nation in terms of mental health services. That is a shame on our state. I agree that we may have to look at subsidies. We also have to recognize exacerbating factors. One of them is housing. I've represented in the legislature rural places where it's very difficult to recruit professionals in the healthcare services because there is no housing, or if there is housing, it is exorbitantly expensive. So we need to understand that while there are aggregations of services in metropolitan areas, the crisis is even worse in rural places, and we need to treat those rural places differently than we treat the urban places. I would also ask us to recognize as Oregonians that by the passage of ballot measure 110, which I did not support, that the pernicious influence of street drugs is driving a mental health crisis and making it even more difficult to recruit people into the field, much less get people into services. And so it's a combination of factors, but housing, drugs, and the paucity of a comprehensive plan are certainly factors.
All right, thank you, Ms. Johnson. Ms. Kotek.
Rural areas have...
Thank you for the question.
I don't know what she's talking about there.
We're seeing too much hurt and suffering there for people who need mental health and addiction treatment, and we can be doing better at the state. That means, as governor, making sure the Oregon Health Authority is accountable for making sure we're showing guidance and leadership with our local providers, making it easy to get the reimbursements, making it clear what is needed on the ground, not having barriers, but yet being a helpful partner to make sure things work. And that really pertains to workforce, making sure we can get lower caseloads for our workforce who work in mental health and addiction treatment, making sure they're paid better. Those things will help recruit and retain the individuals we need to help Oregonians get better. This is healthcare. And as governor, making sure that everything we have when it comes to healthcare is working to make sure this type of care is available when people need it, when they can afford it. That means making the Oregon Health Plan work better. It means working with employers to make sure their coverage is more comprehensive, and paying people better and making it so they can actually help the people they serve.
All right, thank you. Hillary?
You all agreed the state botched its attempt to, or its approach to measure 110, and that many more people need addiction treatment who aren't getting it. or even seeking it. So far, less than 200 people who were ticketed for drug possession have called a treatment hotline, and only a couple dozen said that they wanted help. As governor, would you support mandatory drug treatment under any circumstances? And if so, what would that look like? Ms. Johnson, we'll go to you first.
Absolutely. I'd start by asking the legislature to re-refer ballot measure 110 to the voters. I think that there was not an adequate conversation about the downstream effects of ballot measure 110, which has functionally legalized hard drugs. Under the construct of 110, where people, as you pointed out, Ms. Baroud, in your question, nobody's seeking treatment because there is no mechanism to enforce treatment. There's no possible jail sentence hanging over people. Or
there's no reason for treatment. You just keep using
those services. And why should they? With our
cheaper and easier, just keep using.
In inexpensive, potent drugs, why would this work? And before we spend $1 billion, nearly $1 billion, on services that may or may not be
but I mean, fucking legalize everything.
May not seek treatment.
What?
I would start again, ask the legislature to re-refer it, and to see if we could have a more honest conversation about the terrible effects of open-air drug markets throughout our urban areas.
I like drugs.
What voters have said when they passed Measure 110 is that they want to make sure people who have an addiction are getting the treatment they need. Starting over, I think, will just result in more people dying. What we have to do is make it work. I believe that connection with law enforcement has to be stronger, so those tickets are being written, that there is more of a motivation to get people connected to services. I was just visiting Blanchet Farm out in Yamhill County just yesterday. That's a program where men are in recovery who come there and get back their lives and go on their way. We need more creative solutions around the state. And as governor, it means moving the Measure 110 money. It means moving it to providers around the state. It means holding our state agencies accountable and meeting those goals. It is a top priority for the state. No one should be dying because they can't get the health care they need, and we must do better.
Ms. Drazen.
Tina's full of shit.
People are dying in the streets now. Our overdose rates are 40% higher post Measure 110 than they were previously. We must repeal the portions of ballot Measure 110 that decriminalize hard drugs. We have to do that. If we're serious about solving the homeless challenges in our streets, we also have to be serious about ensuring that people have the opportunity to actually get help and actually get into long-term recovery.
I don't know, Christine. Stay out of my business. What if I want to do drugs?
And had the opportunity to talk to some folks that were engaged in drug use. And the level to which the people that I spoke with were in fact not ready to get treatment was stunning. I talked to a young lady who's 24 years old and had been living on the street for 7 years. Over the course of that time, she'd overdosed 7 times. Her street family had saved her life each time. We cannot allow this to continue.
I mean, I get it. That's terrible, but come on.
We must resolve this crisis, and to do that, we have to repeal ballot Measure 110.
I'm just going to jump in here briefly for all candidates because the original question was, as governor, would you support
Christine would do a bump of coke
treatment under any circumstances? Briefly, 10 seconds or less. Ms. Drazen.
Yeah, I do not support mandatory drug treatment.
Ms. Johnson.
I do not support mandatory drug treatment, but we have to have incentives to get people to accept the services that are offered.
Ms. Kotek.
I don't, because I don't think it works, but we do need to get people connected to services. That means building relationships with those individuals.
Laurel?
There's a staffing shortage for law enforcement across the state, from state police to local departments. Do you think we need more officers on the streets? And if so, what would you do as governor to try to help fill those vacancies? And we begin with Ms. Kotek.
Yes, I do. When people call 911, they need to feel safe and have the right response at the right time. And we do need more officers. And one of the things the state can do is increase the number of classes and trainings that are available so local law enforcement can get new hires through that training in a more efficient manner.
That's not a bad idea.
The state can do. I've always supported our state police. It's important to have state police around the state to particularly serve our rural communities. It's also important that the crime lab and other resources there are at full capacity, so evidence can be assessed and utilized for making charges. So there's a lot we can do in local law enforcement that, as governor, I will definitely support doing. We also need to have different types of response. I support Portland Street Response, mental health crisis, counselors who show up when it's a mental health crisis and not a violent crime. So the right response, have enough people to do that, will make our community safer.
And Ms. Drazen.
You know, Tina Kotek is the original defund the police candidate.
Oh.
She did not support police even when rioters were attacking a police station. It's stunning to me that she would talk now like she supports law enforcement. I will support law enforcement. As governor, I will fully fund state police. As governor, I will support law enforcement because we need it in our communities. Our communities are less safe today because we have
Christine's not
going to
say anything,
on our
though.
Streets. Our police
What are you going to do, though?
ensure community safety. They ensure that we actually have in law.
She's not going to answer the question.
We deserve that. We need that. And as governor, I will ensure that that is our future.
What does that mean? What are you going to do, though?
I will join Ms. Drazen in saying I'm surprised by Tina's answer because we've got to start by respecting our police. That doesn't mean walking with the rioters or excoriating the police when the riots were happening. Tina wrote a letter to Ted Wheeler siding with the rioters.
Here we go.
Ted, incidentally, also showed up with the rioters. But we've got to start by respecting our police, and as governor, I would absolutely do that. The legislature tied the police's hands unnecessarily with legislation that made it harder to deal with a variety of police issues. I voted no on many of those measures that tied the police's hands. My two opponents voted yes to tie their hands. As the co-chair of Ways and Means on the Senate side, I put as much money as we possibly could put in the Oregon State Patrol and would do so again as governor. When I think about the fact that the Bison Coffee House was raided, rioters broke out the windows and painted in the inside because that proprietor offered to have a community conversation with police. I would say that's Exhibit A in the fact that our community does not respect our police. We've created a culture of lawlessness under Tina Kotek and Kate Brown.
A quick response from you, Tina Kotek?
Yeah,
it's pretty good.
It's important when you're running for governor that you don't lie to voters. They're both misrepresenting my record. I do support law enforcement. I've actually been to the Bison Coffee House. It's unacceptable what happened at that small business. It is essential that when someone calls 911, they get the right response. I also think it's important to hold law enforcement accountable.
Portland sucks, and Tina's a Portlander.
As long as she's accused me of being a liar, did you or did you not write a letter to the mayor in support of the rioters versus the police?
Oh.
I did not. That letter was inappropriate use of tear gas in a residential neighborhood.
Thank you, candidates. To another part of Oregon's criminal justice system now. Oregon's public defender system is last in the nation to entirely rely on contractors. And because of a chronic shortage, defendants often don't have adequate representation and cases are dismissed. At one point this year, 4 dozen cases were thrown out in Portland, including a domestic violence case that involved strangulation. Is it time to do away with this system? And if so, what would you replace it with? Ms. Drazen, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, thank you for this question. You know, our public defenders have been underfunded for years. And this is an issue that we have to address. We have got to protect victims. We've got to ensure that at the same time, people have their day in court. And my opponent in this one, we're talking about Tina Kotek's leadership on this issue. She dramatically underfunded our public defenders for years as Speaker of the House. And instead of working for solutions on this issue, she has allowed it to remain. And now this system is in fact broken. The solutions that have been proposed have had a variety of fiscal impacts, and what we need to do is to be able to manage the fiscal impacts while ensuring that we have adequate coverage in these offices.
Betsy's got a zinger.
But is there something specific you would replace it with?
You know, moving from contractor to some other form is going to need to be a slow process.
Get the memes ready. Here comes Betsy.
I would not replace because that would be too difficult. I would overhaul. In my observation, the agency has not been well run for a long time. The contract attorneys that do business with the agency had a hard time getting contracts out and ratified. The contracts were applied differently in different geographic areas. We've expanded the scope, causing there to be huge caseload problems. And so I think if you look throughout the system of how we do public defense services, there's dissatisfaction.
It's not even just the public defense system. It's working with the whole state.
Just saying we'll get rid of it and do something different. I would want to talk to the practitioners who are actually in the courtrooms defending Oregonians and find out what some of their recommendations
I
would
don't
be
do state
rather than a
contracts
prescriptive
anymore at all.
solution.
It's not worth the time or the money.
Too often we do it to Oregonians, not with Oregonians, and I think this is a case where hearing from the practitioners would be exceptionally helpful in designing a new, more streamlined, efficient, and productive system.
Ms. Kotek.
The public defense system is an important cornerstone of our legal system. People must have access to defense if they can't afford it. That's how our system stays fair. We're not meeting that constitutional requirement right now.
Okay.
My opponents seem to have a little lapse in memory. We all supported studies to look at our system, and there's a great study that says we need to change what we're doing. I will say here that we need to change how we're providing public defense services around the state. We need to pay our attorneys better. They need lower caseloads, and I do believe it has to be centralized out of the state. What we're doing right now is not working and is undermining our justice system, is not allowing people to get, due process, and folks who are victims can't get served either if someone doesn't have a lawyer and then that person is let go. We must solve this, and it's another failure from Governor Brown of not paying attention to a key cornerstone of our public safety system, and that's not acceptable, and we're going to fix that when I'm governor.
Thank you.
All right, our next question here is about education. It is from KGW viewer Alicia Orton. Let's take a look.
Hi, I'm an Oregon mother whose child was supposed to start school in 2020. But due to the pandemic, my 5-year-old son lost almost half of his kindergarten year to distance learning on a computer. He now joins an entire generation of kids who are academically behind and struggling to catch up.
You should have homeschooled.
Oregon was one of the very last states to lift lockdown mandates and send our kids back to school. My question to all of the candidates is, how will you support teachers who are underfunded, understaffed, and now have this added burden to address of classrooms full of kids who are behind academically?
All right, our thanks to Alicia for that question. Ms. Johnson, you'll go first.
Good question.
The single worst thing we did during COVID was to shut kids out of the classroom, enforced shutting them out of the classroom for 2 years.
Let's go,
We're
Betsy.
already realizing the academic damage that we did as test scores are coming in, and they are appalling. This continues a 10-year slide in academics in the state of Oregon. But we have yet to measure the social emotional damage that we have done to our kids, much less our mental health challenges as a result of this mandatory locked-out of the schoolrooms. I would listen very heavily to classroom teachers for guidance on how to rectify this. Unlike Ms. Kotek, who relies very heavily on the unions to change the standards when our kids aren't meeting the standards, I would expect high standards. I would enforce high standards. I voted against the bill that has turned a high school diploma into a functional participation certificate. We have to expect the best, and we need to bolster our classrooms right now to rectify the damage that we did during the 2 years that children were forced out of the classroom.
Ms. Kotek.
Thank you for the question, Alicia. I do believe we kept students too long from the classroom, and we're going to have to be making up for that. Fortunately, we have the $1 billion more per year from the Student Success Act to help our districts be able to make this up. And we need to focus on making sure our students can read by 3rd grade. That will be a focus for me as our next governor, because if you're not reading by 3rd grade, our students are 4 times more likely
not reading by 3rd grade. Are you serious?
I'm a strong proponent, and was during the recession and will be going forward.
I don't think Tina's a parent.
For summer school. Making sure our districts can provide different learning opportunities in the summer to help make up for some of that loss that occurred during the pandemic. Making sure that our students have the supports, those social and emotional supports as well, to be successful. There's a lot of work we can do, but I'm going to hold districts to high expectations. To meet those needs, we must serve our students better, and now's the time to step up and do that.
Ms. Drazen.
You know, Kate Brown and Tina Kotek threw our kids under the bus. Alicia, I am sorry for what your son went through. I know how hard it is to watch your students suffer, and that's what kids across our state were doing during the COVID lockdowns. We had some of the longest lockdowns in the nation, and our kids all suffered. It was hard on teachers, it was hard on families, but worst of all, it was hard on our kids. as governor, I will not shut our schools down. And as a member of the legislature, I propose legislation to fully fund schools.
She said hard on a couple times.
At the requested amount, because I knew how hard it was going to be on the other side of COVID to provide all the learning supports, all the interventions, all the additional classroom time that would be needed to fully support our kids and get them back on track after we got on the other side of COVID. But just to be clear, Tina Kotek just lectured all of us about being honest with voters. She could not be more dishonest with voters on this issue. We had the opportunity to reopen schools. She voted no.
All right, Ms. Kotek, I'll give you a chance to respond here to Ms. Drazen's comment that you threw kids alongside the governor under the bus. Her words.
Well, Christine Drazen threw our students under the bus when she voted against the Student Success Act in 2019. She chose corporate special interests over actually adding $1 billion more per year to our schools.
Student Success
has have those resources now to build out from what has occurred during the pandemic. And that is just the truth.
Ms. Drazen, do you want to respond?
Yes, of course, because what she didn't do was answer the question. What she did do is say that a tax is the answer. She has had 10 years to fully fund schools with growth in our budget we've never seen before. She declined to fully fund schools, placed it on the backs of businesses, imperiled jobs, and still didn't answer the question for why she wasn't committed to holding Kate Brown accountable, and instead held hands with Kate Brown, locked arms with Kate Brown to ensure that our kids were locked out of the classrooms longer than almost anywhere else in the nation.
Ms. Kotek, briefly.
I sat down and said, during the pandemic, we need to make sure when schools are reopened that those students can have what they need. That's why I fought, frankly, Governor Brown, to make sure we had summer school funding. And that is something I think we need to go have going forward. But you know what? Let's not play politics with our kids. I'm tired of the rhetoric on this. We need to serve our students. They need help. And because we passed the Student Success Act, which Christine did not support, we have resources to actually make that happen.
All right, thank you all. Laurel.
Student Success Act is crazy.
Of racism, including exclusionary laws. And some people still display Confederate flags, including some Republicans, at the Pendleton Roundup this year. What would you do to help Oregon?
I don't know if I can drop
color feel welcome?
Can I drop a PDF link in chat?
State? And the question first goes to Tina Kotek.
You know, I recently had a conversation.
That goes to a PDF in case anybody's worried.
With individuals, I won't say where,
Oregon State,
who feel unsafe in their community.
It's an equity
because
thing.
Of the rise of white supremacy, because blatant racism in their communities. As governor, I will speak out against that at every turn that I can. We want to have a state where everybody can feel welcome and safe. And it's not just enough to have an increased hate crimes hotline at the Attorney General's office. I'm glad we have that, but we must enforce the laws on the books that say it is not okay to harass or discriminate against another person because of who they are. And we frankly have work to do in this state. And as governor, I'm going to work hard to make sure we have a state where everyone can feel safe and included.
And Ms. Drazen, what would you do to help Oregonians of color feel welcome and supported in our state?
Yeah, I condemn racism in all of its forms. Oregon needs to be a welcoming state for all Oregonians, for everyone. And as governor, I will embrace everyone and be supportive of everyone, and certainly would condemn racism in all of its forms.
I'd like to just give you a little more detail on the Confederate flag that I mentioned. That was on a vehicle driven by the Umatilla County Republicans at the Pendleton Roundup, and on that vehicle they had a banner that said they supported you and former President Trump. The Confederate flag is a symbol of racial oppression and hatred, especially for Black Americans. Do you denounce the display of a Confederate flag anywhere in Oregon by anyone?
Hey.
You know, I was not aware of that, and I absolutely
Somebody had a Confederate flag. How do you feel about that?
Forms. And certainly the Confederate flag would not be welcome in
and at the Roundup of all places.
And Betsy Johnson, what would you do to help Oregonians of color feel safe and welcome and supported?
First of all, acknowledge that Oregon has a very troubled history in this area. And I
would, as
governor, decry racism, bigotry, homophobia, or discrimination in any form. I think it is incumbent upon us to teach the good, the bad, and the ugly of our very mixed past on the issue of racism. And I join my two colleagues in saying that we should do everything possible at all levels of government to decry and root out racism, absolutely.
Thank you, candidates.
I have to say, I believe I'm the only one on the record here having actually done something around the Confederate
Oh,
flag. When the
what?
flag of Mississippi was flying in the circle of flags at the Capitol, I worked to get it taken down because of the Confederate symbolism in that flag. I don't believe
Oh,
the
good job.
Confederate flag as a symbol of racism should be anywhere in our state.
You did great, Tina. Proud of you.
Since the Supreme Court struck down federal abortion rights in June, Oregon is one of a dwindling number of states where patients can still legally get abortions. Do you support spending taxpayer funding to help people from outside Oregon access abortions here in our state? And what if they are victims of rape or if they are preteens? For example, a 10-year-old rape victim from Ohio had to travel to Indiana in order to obtain an abortion. Ms. Drazen, we'll go to you first.
Yeah, thank you. I do not support using taxpayer dollars to pay for abortions.
These are the ones nobody really cares about these. I don't understand why they ask this shit.
Across the state, as I've talked to Oregonians, the challenges facing our state are great. We have deep and substantial issues where funding is needed to address these concerns. We have a constitutional mandate that we just talked about to fully fund our public defenders. I want to fully fund schools. We have a variety of very compelling concerns, including homelessness, behavioral health. I could go on and on. Public funds should not be used to invite people from other states to come into Oregon to receive an abortion. Abortion is legal in
Abortion's
Oregon. And
fucking
as
ridiculous.
Governor, it will
even
remain so.
Never mind.
And people from other states would be able to come into Oregon to receive abortion services. But I do not believe that that's the proper use of taxpayer dollars.
Never mind.
Thank you. I am absolutely
I won't say anything.
pro-choice. But I believe that Oregon taxpayers should, that Oregon taxpayer money should be used for health care for Oregonians. As a former Planned Parenthood board member, Planned Parenthood of the Columbia Pacific, I know that Planned Parenthood has provided financial assistance previously, and now contributions are up for Planned Parenthood offices throughout the country. And I would not use taxpayer money to pay for out-of-state abortions, but rely on Planned Parenthood's past practice of helping financially.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Kotek?
The National Republican agenda is to ban abortion. And the world, the entire country has changed since the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade.
Is it really?
It's important, and I believe strongly in making sure people have access to critical health care, and that includes abortion. And I'm the only candidate in this race endorsed by Planned Parenthood PAC of Oregon and Pro-Choice Oregon.
She lied.
Christine Drazen would ban abortion. The fact that
they don't want to ban abortion
and throw a wrench into the things that we have in place to provide access to health care is a real threat. And there are reasons Planned Parenthood isn't endorsing Betsy Johnson. This is a moment for leadership and making sure that people have the care they need. And that might mean using Oregon taxpayer money to help those individuals have the care they need. And I support that because that is the world we live in right now. And this is a time for champions and leadership to make sure in this strange new world we have.
I think you should shut up and give me my taxes money, my tax money back.
Yeah, thank you. It gets more and more startling to me the extent to which Tina Kotek will lie to voters. This issue is not on the ballot. Access to abortion is in Oregon law. Not only that, but we have access to abortion, elective access to abortion up to birth. We're unique in that way. Almost across the nation, only a handful of other states have that. It is not on the ballot. What actually is at risk is Tina Kotek losing power. And to hold on to power, she's clearly willing to say almost anything she can to scare voters and convince them to support her based on issues which are, in fact, complete fabrication.
They just want to tell you, like, oh, if you get a Republican, they're going to take your abortions.
Quickly, I'm sorry, the original question was about funding for helping people come from out of state to get.
I just want to respond to something. There's been this mythology that I applied for Planned Parenthood endorsement and didn't get it, and I want to clear that up right now. They sent out questionnaires in the primary because I was running unaffiliated. I was not in the primary. We didn't get a chance to present my credentials for the general election, And I just wanted to clear that up once and for all. I was a former Planned Parenthood board member. They trusted me to sit on their board and make decisions about the operation. I am absolutely pro-choice. I left the Republican Party because of that, and I wanted to straighten that
Ms.
record.
Johnson, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Round one. Now we're going to get to questions directed at individual candidates here. A reminder, please keep your responses to no more than 60 seconds here. Our first question here is for Ms. Kotek. It is from a KGW viewer named Lilith Grand. It is on the topic of parents as paid caregivers. Let's take a look.
Huh.
During the pandemic, parents like me were able to be hired on as caregivers for our severely disabled children to fulfill the hours our children already qualify for through Medicaid. The results of this program have been nothing short of amazing. Healthier kids, healthier families, more stability, less reliance on other government programs.
Better outfits and
The
jewelry
other two
for you.
Candidates have already signed on to our grassroots efforts to make this rule permanent. Why haven't you?
All right, thanks. Let me just jump in here. Thanks for that question. We should note, though, our understanding is the temporary funding has been extended through January 11th. A little background there. Ms. Kotek, why haven't you signed on?
Well, I very much appreciate that question, and thank you. I support all kinds of caregivers in the state, always have, and will continue to do that. And this has been a unique situation, and it's been great to hear that it is working for our parents. And it's not that I haven't supported it. I want to look more into the details, and I sent an email to advocates saying as much. And after the election, would be happy to sit down and talk about the details.
After the
see
election.
how we can make it work. Because at the end of the day, our families know how to take care of their loved ones, and we have to figure out how to do it differently. And if this has been working, let's try to figure out how it would work and that we could pay for it at the state level. So I'm definitely open to it. Don't oppose it. Just would love more details.
All right, thank you, Ms. Kotek. Ms. Drazen, we have a viewer question for you now. This one is related to climate change. We'll take a look again.
Ooh, climate change.
Hi, I'm Kristen and I live in Portland.
Something people really care about?
Transportation accounts for 40% of greenhouse emissions in Oregon, and only a fraction of the state's transportation budget goes to projects that will help reduce emissions. As governor, how would you help the state's transportation system reduce emissions in order to meet Oregon's goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions?
You fucking kidding me? Is that real? That's like something people actually ask?
40% of greenhouse gas emissions statewide, the largest single source here. Ms. Drazen.
Yeah, thank you. Oregon has, in fact, been a leader on climate for many years. And when it comes to transitioning our transportation system to
that doesn't seem like
something
that somebody'd really give a fuck about. That's weird.
Continued innovation across our state and across our nation. Oregon has existing programs to incentivize the purchase of electric vehicles. It's very important that as Oregonians
electric vehicles are bullshit, though.
Options which are in fact more climate friendly as they're traveling to and from work and school and throughout their lives, that we have the opportunity to also have a strong electricity grid, a strong energy grid, to continue to be able to support that. We need to be able to continue to maintain our dams, which is a no-emission form of energy, which is also low cost and supports reliable, affordable access.
How would you help? How would you help the states?
The other ways that we can do this, of course, is to continue to have jobs available in all corners of our state.
Reduce the state's transportation
system. Houses next to where they actually work, and reduce commute times and reduce impacts on transportation emissions.
Ms. Drazen, just briefly here, one of the things
state's transportation system, reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Reduce congestion, oppose highway taxes
to reduce emissions
and losers. It sort of seems at odds with what this questioner, Kristen from Portland, is asking.
Actually, it's very in line with what she's asking, because the need to have transportation systems that support all Oregonians is going to continue on for the next century. We do need more lanes. We do need more capacity. We need to move goods and services and people throughout our state. The way that we are going to get there with lower emissions over time, in fact, doesn't have to be no cars. It doesn't have to be all transit. It can be cars that are cleaner, and it has got to be access to more lanes so that people are not idling in traffic.
All right, and I should just point out that some studies say that more vehicles would actually outweigh any benefits from reduced idling.
Especially electric
depending
vehicles.
on which studies you look at here.
I think it also depends on what kind of vehicle it is.
All right, thank you, Ms. Drazen.
Are we allowed to rebut these?
Well, Ms. Kotek, do you want to jump in for a few seconds here?
Well, you know, the #1 program in the state right now that's reducing our transportation emissions is the Clean Fuel Program, our low carbon fuel standard that we have. And Representative Drazen wants to suspend that. It is working right now. And so this stuff about the future and the electric grid, great, but She wants to suspend the clean fuels program because big oil doesn't like it, and she's taking support from big oil.
All right, Ms.
So
Drazen.
given that, I am going to respond to that. That's ridiculous. So the clean fuels program itself, as it was enacted, had a trigger in there should the costs increase beyond what was reasonable for people to be able to continue the program. I'm suggesting that while gas prices in Oregon are third highest in the whole nation, that there are levers available at the state level to continue to support and improve affordability for Oregon families, and temporarily suspending the clean fuels program, as envisioned by the legislation itself, is one of those options.
All right, thank you, Ms. Drazen, Ms. Kotek. Let's get to a viewer question for you, Ms. Johnson, now. This is from Joel in Wilsonville, who writes, since you've been a lifelong Democrat, how do you square yourself with knowing that your current efforts will probably cost Democrats the governorship for the state?
Well, let me start by refuting that premise. I got into this race because I believed I was the best candidate. The capability, the courage, the institutional history to provide real leadership for a state that has gone off the rails under the leadership of Kate Brown and during the time that Tina Kotek was Speaker. And so the notion that I'm in here other than for the purpose of winning this race is silly. I believe that, you know, sports odds makers don't win games. Polls don't predict elections. I've seen enough fourth quarter finishes to know that it's not over until it's over, and I'm in this race until the absolute end. I believe that Oregon needs to get back on track. What you've seen tonight from my two opponents is the typical Republican and Democrat talking points. They're flying in celebrities to help boost their bases. They're spending $1 million a week on ads, and you know, so the celebrities come in, have an ice cream, and go home. My question in this is, where are the Oregonians? This election shouldn't be about who wins a horse race. It ought to be about how we govern. And the whole rationale behind my independent campaign is to say we need to put people back in charge, not the political parties, and make sure that all voices are heard at the table of Oregon civics.
Let me just
That's why I like Betsy.
build on that question, because you mentioned the polls, and right now the polls show you 12 to 15 points behind. Are you a spoiler right now? Have you ever considered dropping out and throwing your support to one of the other candidates?
I absolutely have not considered dropping out, and the spoiler in this race is Tina. Tina has spoiled a state I love. She spoiled the party that I used to belong to with these outrageously progressive policies that I spoke out against during my time in the legislature. I kept saying to my colleagues, you continue to go on this progressive route that is ostensibly waging war on the rest of Oregon, and there is going to be a price to pay.
Oh, look at Tina, fucking
put me into this race.
Christine, relax.
Watching a state I love spiral into urban decay in our urban areas and a lack of opportunity.
Let's go,
in our
Betsy.
rural areas. So no, I am not leaving the race. I am in it until the end, and I fully intend to be the next governor.
Our next,
I have
did you
to
want to respond
to that.
quickly?
I mean, I love this state just as much as she does. We don't need to take a hard right turn to put our state back on track. And when she talks about whatever she thinks were progressive issues, is she talking about increasing the minimum wage that she voted against? Is she talking about paid sick leave that she voted against? Is she talking about taking action on climate change, which she opposed at every point? I'm not sure what that means. What I'm saying is we need to fix our problems here in Oregon, and we can do that by working together. There will be a new governor, one who will lead us in a way that is aligned with our values, and this is a two-person race right now.
All right, Ms. Drazen, just briefly.
Yeah, very briefly. This, to me, is the issue. I am in this race because Oregon is on the wrong track, because single-party control, because one version of a Democrat compared to another version of a Democrat is not balanced. And that's what I'm seeing here with both Betsy and Tina. They're having an argument about what Democrats should be about. I want to bring Oregon back to balance again, and the way you're going to do that, in fact, is to elect a Republican. It is not a hard right. It's called balance.
All right, thank you. Laurel.
So this question goes to Tina Kotek. It builds on the education question.
I really think
that
like
to lower graduation standards for Oregon
I feel
high
like
school students that will continue
Betsy's
going to
take some Republicans also. So it makes the
union.
Democrat tie even
What
closer.
Can you give Oregonians they can trust you to hold K through 12 educators to high standards for student outcomes, and what's one way you would specifically do that?
Well, I have high expectations for our districts, our educators, and our students, because we want to increase our graduation rates. We want to make sure our students have what they need. And to the bill that you're talking about, I voted to assess whether the graduation requirements we have are actually useful. We must have high, rigorous standards for our students, and we might have to make some adjustments for what's on the books, and we have to make sure our students graduate. That's why I was so passionate about
We need to turn our high schools into trade schools is what we need to do.
In 2019, 30 years of underfunding our schools. We finally made progress, $1 billion more per year that now my opponents want to undo. Those dollars were not just more money into the kitty.
We need kids to come out of high school with the skills to get a fucking job.
Education. We're going to make sure students graduate. My job as a governor is to hold our districts accountable to achieving those goals, and that's what I plan to do.
And the question talked about unions too, and unions have made millions of dollars of contributions to your campaign. How can voters have confidence that you will make decisions?
We're going to have to anyway pretty soon, because you're going to have to get involved in the war effort. If you can't be drafted, you're going to have to start welding.
And the number one priorities right now are housing.
Might as well learn how to weld in high school. That way you can
how our students succeed.
fucking build bombs.
Loses their housing and has to change a school district, they fall, a half a year behind in their academic progress. Housing and homelessness is not a partisan issue. It's not a labor issue. It's the top issue in our state. So is mental health and addiction. And when it comes to our schools, it's always going to be about what the students need. And I think our educators across our state, I value them and I will hold them accountable. Those things are not inconsistent.
Thank you, Ms. Kotek.
Ms. Drazen, there are candidates and members of your party who believe the 2020 election was stolen, despite no evidence of widespread fraud. Should being an election denier disqualify someone from holding office?
No, absolutely not.
I have always stood for the folks to actually make their own decisions when it comes to who you vote for. So if you look at someone who's running for a race, I trust Oregon voters to make decisions for who they choose to vote for and who they don't choose to vote for. And that includes across the board. I think that we should have an open democracy, and I think that Oregon voters themselves should make this decision.
Well, but as someone who is running for governor, your opinion does matter to a lot of Oregonians. And
mine does. If you say right now that it was fucking stolen, I vote for you.
Campaign, the Republican candidate for U.S. Senate, Joe Ray Perkins, who believes in the baseless conspiracy theory QAnon and had gone to Washington, D.C. for the January 6th rally.
What are they doing?
You were asked whether you supported her. Can you explain why?
Why are they going after her right now? This is awesome.
Candidates, including Ms. Perkins, well.
Here's what I can explain. I'm running for governor myself, and I'm focused on my race for governor.
Got a crazy
as governor,
eyelash.
I will be respectful of all Oregonians, regardless of party affiliation, regardless of views.
Tell me about your Q stuff.
The quality of life for all Oregonians, and this race is about running for governor. It's not about other races. It's not about other candidates, and it has to be about Oregonians themselves.
KGW going hard.
Betsy Johnson, you were the only candidate on the stage who hasn't released her taxes fully for voters to see. Why not?
I have filled out, they're called certificates of economic interest since they were first required. And so if somebody's interested in knowing anything about my financial background, they can go to years worth of SEIs and check it out. Find out how many shares of stocks I own, what other assets I own. My husband and I filed jointly. He is not running for governor, and he deserves the right of privacy.
So why not make all of that public? Because don't you think voters deserve transparency?
It is public, and it is transparent. Those economic interest forms, I don't know if you've ever looked at one, but they are remarkably detailed, and I have filled them out rigorously since they were required by elected officials. And anybody wants to know anything about my financial history, they can go to those SEIs at the government ethics, and they can pour through them to their heart's content.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
All right,
David?
candidates, it is time for the lightning round, a chance to catch
lightning round.
Perhaps, and to get some to the outstanding topics on our list here. In this section, unless otherwise specified, please keep your answer to a sentence at most.
A sentence.
And let us start
oh my
here
God,
with
this sounds good.
How would you describe your leadership style, Ms. Kotek?
Inclusive.
Ms. Johnson.
Leadership is taking other people places you might not want to go.
Ms. Drazen.
Collaborative and respectful.
How would you describe your ability to compromise, Ms. Drazen?
Active and engaged.
Ms. Johnson.
High and demonstrable.
Ms. Kotek.
clear, and I am pragmatic, and it's necessary to do that.
Do you support Measure 113, which would penalize Oregon lawmakers who do not show up to the legislature? Ms. Johnson.
I do not, because it puts too much power in the hands of the presiding officer of the Oregon legislature.
Ms. Kotek.
I do support it because if you don't show up for your job like everybody else, you should be fired.
Ms. Drazen.
I don't support it because in a state like Oregon with single-party control, it is critical to protect the voices of the minority members of the legislature.
All right, this governor's race already the most expensive in state history, $55 million and counting. If elected, will you commit to ending unlimited campaign contributions in Oregon? Tina.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
As long as it is equitable. You can't shut the private sector out and allow the unions to pour money into races as they have in Ms. Kotek's case.
And Christine, Ms. Drazen.
Yeah, it has to be fair across the board, and candidates cannot lose their voice and their ability to communicate directly with voters.
Let me ask you this. Merritt
That's a long
Paulson,
sentence.
should Merritt Paulson sell the Portland Thorns and Timbers? Ms. Drazen.
No.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Boo.
Ask you this one. What's something that would
Lame.
surprise people about you, Ms. Johnson?
That I was Benji the dog's pilot in a movie that was filmed here in Oregon a number of years ago.
What the hell?
That I, in fact, love archery.
Ms. Kotek.
Oh, let's go back to the Wayback Machine, that I played the lead in the Mary Poppins musical in my elementary school.
All right, I'm going to flip back to a more serious topic here. What one word would you use to describe Portland's image right now?
Fuck
Ms. Drazen,
Portland.
one word.
Oh, sorry.
Scary.
Ms. Kotek.
Who?
Tarnished.
Ms. Johnson.
I was going to use tarnish, but I'm now going to say in extremis.
What would you do to change or fix that image, Ms. Johnson?
Get people off the streets. Get people to feel safe. We need more cops. We need to bring back the gang enforcement. We need to bring back the task forces that dealt with
All
crime.
right, one sentence there. That's a
No.
run, Ms. Kotek.
Well, first of all, I would never disparage our city to a national publication.
Okay,
I
one
would.
sentence,
Portland
Ms. Drazen.
sucks.
Refund our police and support local engagement in our homeless response.
Last question here. Which of your two opponents here do you most respect and why, Ms. Drazen?
Oh.
I most respect Senator Johnson because she is, in fact, a longtime public servant.
Ms. Kotek.
Senator Johnson for her constituent work.
Ms. Johnson.
Ms. Kotek, because she has brought the unbridled use of power to an
Oh.
art form in pushing legislation
Oh.
to the Oregon House.
All right.
That means I'm effective? Is that?
There we go. Ms. Kotek, Ms.
Okay.
Johnson, Ms. Drazen, thank you very much. That wraps up the KGW.
There it was. That was
debate
good.
In the race for Oregon governor. Really, our thanks again to all of
Damn.
you, all the candidates, for an engaging, revealing, and respectful conversation
Whoop.
over this last hour. A reminder, with Election Day less than 3 weeks away, ballots are in the mail. The drop-off deadline is 8 p.m. on election night. If you mail in a ballot, a reminder, it has to be postmarked by election day.
man.
No, you can read
Little Theo's nose had.
That was pretty fun. That was a good time. All right. Well, thank you guys for hanging out. If anybody watched or anybody else had enjoyed the debate, I thought it was pretty good. Tomorrow night, possibly. I don't know what day is it. Today is Wednesday. Tomorrow's Thursday. I think I have something to do tomorrow, but possibly late tomorrow night. If not then maybe Friday we'll be going through the voter's guide. So I got my voter's guide in the mail. I got my paper one I can read, and I'll put the I'll put the PDF one up on the screen, and we'll just read through the whole thing together and drink some beers. Figure out who we're going to vote for. This is the last governor's debate. Nobody chatted at all, so I don't care where you guys stand. It doesn't matter. I'll read the comments later, and I'll subscribe to your porns that you send me. So that's the only comments I ever get. And yeah. All right, so I guess we'll just wrap it up there. Thank you very much for watching. You guys have a great night, and good luck voting. We'll see you next time. Maybe. me figure out how to end it. I lost my window. There we go. Okay, see